The Tarvani Empire was one of the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. Its massive fleets, powerful technology, and ancient traditions made it a force that few dared to challenge. Among its many worlds, Earth was nothing more than a small, forgotten planet, a place with no influence, no power, and no importance. The Tarvani people, especially the royal family, barely considered humans worthy of notice. The four princesses of the Tarvani Empire, Ilara, Sithra, Valus, and Xyra, had spent their entire lives preparing to rule. Each one was brilliant, strong, and proud. They had been raised to believe that their empire was the greatest in the galaxy and that no species, especially humans, could ever match their greatness. That belief was about to be shattered. The king's will. The royal court of the Tarvani Empire was filled with nobles, generals, and advisors. They had all gathered in the Great Hall of Judgment, waiting for the final announcement of their ruler's last decree. King Zorith, the powerful and wise ruler of the empire, had passed away just hours ago. His daughters were prepared to take control. Ilara, the eldest, stood confidently, expecting to be declared the new empress. Sithra, the strategist, was ready to assist her sister in leading the empire. Valus, the diplomat, had already planned the political alliances they needed. Xyra, the youngest, was eager to prove herself worthy of the throne. Then the royal scribe stepped forward with the will. "The great King Zorith has spoken," the scribe announced. His voice echoed through the hall. By his final command, the future of the empire shall follow an ancient law, a forgotten agreement made by the first rulers of Tarvani. A murmur spread through the court. The princesses frowned. What ancient law? "The throne of the Tarvani Empire," the scribe continued, "shall not be passed to the princesses alone. Instead, it shall be inherited by a descendant of the one who once saved the royal bloodline, a human." Silence. Then a wave of shock. A human. Ilara's voice was sharp with disbelief. Sithra's eyes narrowed. This must be a mistake. Valus crossed her arms. Impossible. Xyra simply laughed. This is a joke, right? The scribe's expression did not change. The will of the king is absolute. The name of the human heir is Daniel Holt of Earth, a name no one knew. The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted in outrage. Advisors whispered in confusion. The princesses stood frozen. Ilara clenched her fists. Who is this Daniel Holt? One of the advisors quickly checked the royal records. A human from Earth. An engineer. No political power, no military background. Completely unknown. A nobody. Sithra muttered. The scribe cleared his throat. The law states that this human has two choices. He may accept his role as ruler. Unacceptable. Ilara snapped. Or he may decline, in which case the throne shall be open for claim by any noble house, leading to a war for power, the scribe finished. The room fell silent again. The princesses exchanged glances. This was more dangerous than they thought. If Daniel Holt refused, the empire would be thrown into chaos. Noble families would fight for the throne, tearing their civilization apart. No matter how much they hated the idea, they needed to meet this human. Meanwhile, on Earth, Daniel Holt was just an ordinary man, a hard-working engineer. He spent his days designing and repairing space station systems. Life was simple. No fame, no wealth, just work and the occasional trip to a local cafe. Then, one morning, everything changed. As he sipped his coffee, a shadow passed over him. He looked up and nearly dropped his cup. Hovering above the city was a massive alien ship, unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Before he could react, beams of blue light shot down, surrounding him. The next thing he knew, the world faded to white. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing in a grand hall, filled with towering alien figures. At the center stood four women, each of them radiating authority, intelligence, and most of all, irritation. "Are you Daniel Holt?" the tallest one asked, her voice carrying a tone of disbelief. Daniel blinked. Yeah. The four princesses exchanged looks. This is the man who inherited our empire? Sithra asked, unimpressed. Zyra smirked. This has to be a mistake. Ilara stepped forward. Listen carefully, human. We do not accept this. You will refuse the throne and return to your little planet immediately. Daniel frowned. Wait, what? Throne? What are you talking about? The royal scribe stepped forward and cleared his throat. By the will of King Zorith, you are now the rightful heir to the Tarvani Empire. Daniel stared. Then he laughed nervously. Okay, I don't know what kind of prank this is, but you've got the wrong guy. Valis sighed. This isn't a joke. Daniel's expression changed as he realized they were serious. He had just inherited an empire, and four very angry princesses. Daniel Holt had never imagined his life would take such a bizarre turn. One moment, he was enjoying his morning coffee, thinking about his next engineering project. The next, he was standing inside an enormous alien palace, surrounded by towering beings who all looked ready to throw him out into space. Four of those beings, tall, elegant, and clearly important, were staring at him like he was an insect that had somehow landed on their royal feast. This is a mistake, Ilara, the eldest princess, said coldly. She turned to the royal scribe. Fix it. The scribe, a small and nervous-looking alien, swallowed hard. Your Highness, the will of King Zorith is clear. The human Daniel Holt is the legal heir to the throne. The ancient law. I don't care about ancient laws. Sithra interrupted, her eyes sharp. How can a human rule the Tarvani Empire? Daniel, who had been quiet until now, finally found his voice. Hold on. Can someone please explain what's going on? Valis, the third princess, sighed. It's simple. Our father, the late King Zorith, left a will, and for some ridiculous reason, he named you, a human from Earth, as his heir. Daniel blinked. That doesn't make any sense. Exactly, Zyra, the youngest princess, said, crossing her arms. So, you'll refuse the throne and let us handle things, right? Daniel frowned. Wait a second. If I say no, what happens? The scribe hesitated before answering. If you refuse, the throne will be left unclaimed. According to the Empire's laws, this would cause a power struggle. Rival noble houses would fight for control, and the Empire could fall into chaos. Daniel's stomach sank. So, if I say no, there's a civil war. Most likely, the scribe confirmed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. He was just an engineer. He had no idea how to rule an empire. And yet, if he walked away, an entire civilization could collapse. A dangerous choice. Ilara took a step closer, her golden eyes locked onto Daniel's. You are not one of us. You know nothing about our empire, our culture, or our people. If you try to claim the throne, you will be challenged. You will fail. Daniel met her gaze. And if I don't try, the empire falls into war. Ilara didn't answer. That was all the confirmation he needed. Daniel sighed. All right. What if I accept? What happens then? The scribe hesitated again. According to Tarvani law, you must prove yourself worthy. The royal trials will determine if you are fit to rule. Sithra smirked. And you won't pass them. Valis nodded. The trials test leadership, intelligence, diplomacy, and resilience. They were designed for Tarvani royalty, not for a human from a primitive world. Daniel's mind raced. He wasn't a warrior, but he was good at solving problems. Maybe there was a way to survive this. Maybe he could at least keep the empire stable long enough to find a better solution. He took a deep breath. All right. I'll take the trials. The entire hall fell silent. The nobles and advisors exchanged shocked looks. Even the princesses seemed momentarily stunned. Then, Zyra burst into laughter. You? Taking the royal trials. This is going to be fun. Ilara's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, human. Daniel shrugged. Maybe. But if the only other option is war, I don't see much of a choice. The first challenge. The next day, Daniel was led into the grand arena, where the first trial would take place. The stadium was filled with thousands of Tarvani citizens, eager to see the unworthy human fail. The princesses stood on a high platform, watching. The first trial, the announcer boomed, is the trial of leadership. The heir must demonstrate the ability to command and strategize. A massive holographic battlefield appeared in the center of the arena. It was a simulation of a space war. 2 fleets, one controlled by Daniel, the other by an experienced Tarvani general. Daniel's heart pounded. He had played strategy games before, but this was real. If he lost, his claim to the throne would be in serious danger. The match began. The Tarvani general launched an aggressive assault, sending powerful warships straight at Daniel's fleet. The audience cheered. It was clear they expected a quick victory. But Daniel didn't panic. Instead, he studied the battlefield. These ships are faster than mine, he muttered, but their formation is too predictable. He quickly adjusted his strategy. Instead of fighting head-on, he used hit-and-run tactics, attacking weak points and then retreating before the enemy could respond. Minutes passed, then an hour. The general started to look frustrated. His powerful fleet was being chipped away piece by piece. Then, with one final maneuver, Daniel led the enemy into a trap, an ambush that wiped out their flagship. The simulation ended. Silence. Then, the announcer's voice rang out. The human wins. The crowd gasped. On the platform, the princesses looked stunned. Even Ilara's composure cracked for a brief moment. Daniel let out a slow breath. All right, he muttered to himself. 1 down. But he knew this was just the beginning. The hardest challenges were yet to come. The arena was still silent. Thousands of Tarvani spectators sat in stunned disbelief. Moments ago, they had expected the unknown human to fail his first trial. Instead, Daniel Holt had done the impossible. He had won. Daniel took a deep breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. His heart was still racing from the battle simulation. He had barely managed to outmaneuver the Tarvani general, but luck had played no role in his victory. He had used strategy, patience, and careful observation. But as he looked up at the royal platform, he could see that the princesses were not impressed. A cold reception. Ilara, the eldest, folded her arms, her golden eyes cold. A single victory changes nothing. That was a simulation. Real leadership requires far more than tricks. Sifra nodded. You surprised us, human, but do not mistake luck for skill. The next trial will not be so easy. Daniel sighed. I figured as much. Velas studied him carefully. You didn't fight like a warrior. You fought like an engineer. You broke down the problem and found the simplest solution. Daniel shrugged. That's what I do. Zyra smirked. Let's see if that works in the next challenge. Before Daniel could respond, the royal scribe stepped forward. The next trial begins tomorrow. Rest while you can, human. A night of uncertainty. Daniel was led back to his quarters, an elegant but unfamiliar room inside the royal palace. The bed was comfortable. The air was fresh, but he couldn't relax. He sat by the window, staring at the twin moons of the Tarvani homeworld. He was still trying to process everything. Less than 48 hours ago, he had been an ordinary engineer. Now, he was in the middle of a fight for the most powerful throne in the galaxy. He had won the first trial, but the princesses were right. The real challenges were still ahead. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Velas stood outside, her expression unreadable. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect a visit. Velas stepped inside. I have a question. Go ahead. The princess hesitated. You are not trained for war. You are not a politician. You have no experience in ruling. So, why are you really doing this? Daniel sighed. Because if I refuse, your empire falls into chaos. Valus frowned. That's the only reason. Daniel looked out the window. Maybe I just don't like seeing things fall apart. For a moment, Valus said nothing. Then she turned toward the door. Get some sleep, human. You'll need it. Then she was gone. The second trial. The test of strength. The next morning, Daniel stood once again in the grand arena. This time, there was no battlefield simulation. Instead, a massive open space had been cleared. The crowd murmured in excitement. Ilara stepped forward. This is the trial of strength, she announced. In our empire, a ruler must be more than just intelligent. They must be strong, both in body and spirit. Today, you will face a challenge of endurance. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I'm guessing this isn't going to be a simple workout. Sithra smirked. No, human, you will be given an impossible task. Let's see how long you last before you give up. A massive gate opened at the far end of the arena. A towering beast stomped into the open field, a creature with armored skin, 4 muscular legs, and burning red eyes. It let out a thunderous roar. Daniel's mouth went dry. You have to be kidding me. Styra grinned. Good luck. The trial begins. The beast charged. Daniel barely had time to roll out of the way as the ground shook from the impact. The creature was fast, too fast for him to outrun. Think. He couldn't fight it head-on. It was bigger, stronger, and had natural armor. But maybe he didn't have to fight it at all. Daniel sprinted toward a series of stone pillars in the arena. The beast roared and chased after him, smashing through one of the pillars. The crowd gasped. Daniel took deep breaths, forcing himself to stay calm. He noticed something. Each time the beast hit a pillar, it took longer to recover. It's strong, but it's not smart. Daniel started weaving through the pillars, forcing the beast to chase him. Every time it smashed through an obstacle, it slowed down just a little more. Its breathing grew heavier. The crowd, once eager for a quick defeat, started watching with curiosity. After several minutes, the beast stumbled. Daniel saw his chance. He grabbed a long metal rod from the ground, likely dropped from a previous match, and rushed toward the beast. Instead of attacking, he jammed the rod between 2 of its armored plates. The beast roared in frustration, trying to shake it loose, but it couldn't reach the exact spot. Then, with a final exhausted breath, the beast collapsed. Silence. Then the announcer's voice rang out. The human has survived. The crowd erupted into mixed reactions. Some cheered, some booed, but no one could deny it. Daniel had passed the second trial. New reactions. Daniel walked back to the center of the arena, breathing hard. His arms ached, and he was covered in sweat, but he had done it. The princesses were watching him closely. Ilara's face was unreadable. Sithra frowned. You should have lost. Valus tilted her head. You didn't fight like a warrior. Again, you solved the problem instead of trying to overpower it. Zyra's smirk had faded. Maybe we underestimated him. Daniel wiped his face. So, what's next? Ilara's golden eyes studied him for a long moment. Then she turned. The third trial begins soon. Rest while you can. As Daniel walked away, he could feel something shifting. The princesses still didn't respect him. Not yet. But for the first time, they weren't laughing anymore. Daniel sat in his quarters, his body aching from the second trial. He had barely survived the fight against the beast, and his muscles still felt sore. He wanted to rest, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. He had passed 2 trials. That was 2 more than anyone had expected. But he knew the hardest challenges were still ahead. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Valus stepped inside. She wasn't smiling, but her usual coldness was missing. "You surprised everyone today," she said. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, you sound almost impressed." Valis crossed her arms. "I wouldn't go that far. But I am curious. Why do you keep winning? You aren't stronger than us. You aren't faster. And yet, you keep finding a way." Daniel shrugged. "Because I don't fight the way you expect. You all keep trying to test me like a Tarvani warrior. But I'm human. I don't fight like you. I solve problems." Valis didn't respond right away. Finally, she said, "Tomorrow's trial is different. Strength won't help you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's next?" She turned to leave. "The trial of diplomacy. Let's see if your problem-solving works there." Then she was gone. A dangerous meeting. The next morning, Daniel stood in the royal hall. Unlike the previous trials, there was no massive arena, no giant beast waiting to crush him. Instead, he faced something far more dangerous: 3 alien ambassadors, each from a rival faction of the Empire. Ilara stepped forward. "The trial of diplomacy is simple. These 3 ambassadors have long-standing disputes with our empire. You must negotiate a peaceful solution to at least one of their conflicts." Daniel frowned. "So this is a test of politics and survival." Sithra smirked. "Careful, human. If you offend them, they might declare war." "Great. No pressure." The first ambassador, a tall, blue-skinned alien with sharp features, spoke first. "I am Ambassador Varric of the Drulkar Dominion. For years, the Tarvani Empire has refused to grant us access to trade routes through the Kethari Belt. This has cost my people greatly. Will you change this?" Before Daniel could answer, the second ambassador, a reptilian being named Sorkith, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "You cannot allow that. The Drulkar have a history of piracy. They will use those trade routes to attack our colonies." Daniel quickly realized the problem. If he agreed with Varric, he'd anger Sorkith. If he refused, he'd lose Varric's trust. "Think, Daniel. Solve the problem." He took a deep breath. "Ambassador Varric, your people need access to the trade routes. But Ambassador Sorkith, your people fear attacks. What if we put security checkpoints along the trade lanes? Tarvani ships could monitor all activity to ensure no piracy happens." The 2 ambassadors exchanged glances. Varric stroked his chin. "That could work." Sorkath still looked unsure. "And who will fund these security checkpoints?" Daniel hesitated. "Both of your factions could contribute to the cost. The Tarvani Empire could manage the operation, ensuring fairness. That way, no side feels cheated." Silence. Then Varric nodded. "This is acceptable." Sorkith sighed but agreed. "Fine, but I want regular reports on all trade activity." Daniel turned to Ilara. "Is that possible?" She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "It is." The crowd watching the trial murmured in surprise. Daniel had done it. He had solved a problem that had plagued the Empire for years. A shift in perception. As the ambassadors left, Ilara stepped forward. For the first time, she didn't look completely hostile. "You handled that well, human," she admitted. "Perhaps you are not as foolish as I thought." Sithra frowned. He just got lucky. Valis, however, was watching Daniel with new interest. No, he didn't. He understood the problem and found a way to make both sides happy. That wasn't luck. Xyra chuckled. "This is getting interesting." Daniel sighed. "So, what's next?" Ilara's expression turned serious. "The next trial is the most dangerous of all." Daniel frowned. "More dangerous than fighting a giant beast?" Ilara nodded. "Yes, because this time you will not be fighting an enemy." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "Then who am I fighting?" Ilara's golden eyes met his. "Yourself." Daniel sat alone in a dark chamber, his heartbeat slow but steady. The air was cold, and the silence felt heavy, pressing against his thoughts. This was nothing like the previous trials. No enemy stood before him. No beasts to outsmart. No ambassadors to negotiate with. And yet, Alar's words echoed in his mind. The next trial is the most dangerous of all, because this time you will not be fighting an enemy. You will be fighting yourself. Daniel clenched his fists. What did that mean? Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls blurred, twisting into strange, moving shapes. A deep hum filled the air, growing louder. Then, darkness. And when the darkness lifted, Daniel was no longer in the chamber. A world that shouldn't exist. Daniel looked around, confused. He was standing in a massive city, but it wasn't the Tarvani homeworld. It wasn't even alien. It was Earth. His breath caught in his throat. Skyscrapers stretched high above him, their glass windows reflecting the golden glow of a setting sun. Hovercars zipped through the sky, neon signs flashed in the distance, and people walked the streets. Daniel turned in a slow circle. This was impossible. He knew this place. It was New London, his home city. But that didn't make sense. He had been on an alien world, fighting for an empire he barely understood. How could he be back on Earth? Daniel. The voice made him freeze. It was familiar, too familiar. He turned and saw a man standing a few feet away. The man had short brown hair, sharp blue eyes, and a confident stance. He looked exactly like Daniel. A perfect copy. What? Daniel stepped back, his mind racing. The second Daniel smiled. Welcome to the trial of will. The battle within. Daniel's double took a slow step forward. You've done well so far. You survived the first trials. You fought, you negotiated, you adapted. Daniel narrowed his eyes. And now what? His double tilted his head. Now you faced the truth. The city flickered like a broken hologram. The streets cracked, the buildings warped, and suddenly, the world around him changed. Daniel was no longer in New London. He was in deep space, floating above a massive battlefield. He could see the Tarvani fleets clashing with enemy ships, explosions tearing through the void. Planets burned in the distance. Screams echoed through his mind. This is the future, his double said. A future where you fail. Daniel clenched his fists. This isn't real. His double smirked. No, but the choices you make are real. If you fail, the empire collapses. Millions will suffer. Are you really ready for that? Daniel's breath came faster. He had never wanted this. He was an engineer, not a leader. The battlefield flickered again, shifting into another scene. This time, Daniel was in the Tarvani palace. The princesses stood before him, looking at him with disappointment. Ilara's voice was sharp. You are not strong enough. Sithra sneered. You are not worthy. Zyra smirked. You should have never been chosen. Valus sighed. You should leave before you destroy everything. Daniel's hands trembled. He had been proving himself in the trials. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, they're right. You don't belong here. His double stepped closer. You know this is true, don't you? You aren't a king. You aren't a warrior. You are just a human. A weak human. The words hit deep, but Daniel gritted his teeth. No. His double raised an eyebrow. No. Daniel took a deep breath. I'm not weak. I'm not a warrior, but I'm not a failure either. The world around him cracked. Daniel stepped forward, eyes burning with determination. I didn't ask for this, but that doesn't mean I'll run. His double frowned. You really think you can win? Daniel smirked. I don't have to be the strongest. I don't have to be the smartest. I just have to keep going. The world shattered like glass, and when the darkness lifted, Daniel was back in the chamber. Victory and recognition. The chamber doors opened, revealing the princesses standing outside. The moment Daniel stepped out, the air around him felt different. The crowd that had gathered in the palace corridors was silent, waiting. Ilara stepped forward. For the first time, her golden eyes held something new: respect. "You passed," she said simply. Sithra folded her arms. "Few warriors survive the trial of will. Even fewer emerge stronger. But you refused to break." Zyra smirked. "Maybe you really do belong here, human." Vela studied him, her expression unreadable. "You faced yourself, and you won." Daniel let out a slow breath. "So, what's next?" Ilara's expression grew serious. "The final trial." Daniel met her gaze, unshaken. "Bring it on." Daniel stood at the center of the royal hall, his heartbeat steady. The weight of the previous trial still lingered in his body. Bruises from the battle with the beast, exhaustion from the diplomacy challenge, and the strange unease from facing himself in the trial of will. But now, none of that mattered. This was the final trial. The four princesses stood before him, their expressions unreadable. Behind them, a massive crowd had gathered. High-ranking Tarvani warriors, noble families, and even the royal advisors watched in silence. Ilara stepped forward. "You have passed the first 6 trials. You have proven strength, intelligence, and resilience. But one challenge remains." Daniel took a deep breath. "What is it?" Vela spoke next. "This trial is different. No beasts, no battles, no mind games." Sithra crossed her arms. "This is a test of command." Daniel frowned. "Command." Zyra grinned. "That's right, human. Today, you won't fight alone. Today, you lead." Daniel's stomach twisted. He had expected another brutal challenge, maybe even a fight to the death. But this was worse. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a leader. How was he supposed to command an army? A test of leadership. Ilara gestured, and the massive hall transformed. The floor lit up, forming a holographic battlefield. Alien landscapes flickered to life. Mountains, rivers, fortresses. 2 opposing armies appeared, one blue, one red. Tiny figures representing soldiers, ships, and battle mechs moved across the map. "This is a war simulation," Ilara explained. "Your goal is simple: lead the blue army to victory." Sithra smirked. "But be warned, the red army is controlled by us." Daniel's eyes widened. "Wait, all 4 of you?" Zyra grinned. "Of course. We're royalty. We've trained in strategy since birth. You'll have to outthink all of us." Daniel exhaled. "Great. No pressure." Velas tapped a control panel, and the simulation started. "Your forces are positioned in the valley. You have infantry, tanks, and air support, but the enemy holds the high ground." Daniel studied the holographic battlefield. The Red Army had a clear advantage: fortified positions, artillery, and strong defensive lines. If he attacked directly, he'd be crushed. The crowd watched in silence as he made his first move. Daniel pointed at a narrow canyon. "Send a small force through here, just enough to make it look like a real attack." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "A distraction." Daniel nodded. "Yes. Meanwhile, I'll send my main force through the forest on the left flank. If I time it right, they'll hit the enemy from behind." Sithra smirked. "Clever. But let's see if it works." The simulation played out. Daniel's distraction force moved through the canyon, drawing enemy fire. At the same time, his main army advanced unseen through the dense forest. Then, the ambush struck. Daniel's forces swarmed the enemy's exposed side. The Red Army's defensive line collapsed. The crowd murmured in surprise. Zyra let out a laugh. "Not bad, human." Ilara frowned and adjusted her strategy. The Red Army retreated, regrouping at a fortress deep in the mountains. Daniel leaned forward. His earlier victory had been smart, but now the enemy had fortified themselves again. A direct attack would be suicide. He had to think. Then an idea hit him. He turned to Velas. "Can my air units carry supplies?" Velas nodded. "Yes." Daniel grinned. "Then I won't attack." I'll wait. Ilara's eyes narrowed. What? Daniel moved his air support units, blocking the enemy's supply routes. At the same time, he ordered his ground troops to surround the fortress, but not attack. Sithra's expression darkened. You're cutting off our resources. Daniel nodded. That's right. You have more firepower, but without food and supplies, your army will weaken over time. You'll be forced to surrender. The princesses exchanged glances. The simulation continued for several minutes. The Red Army held their position, but as time passed, their forces grew weaker. Finally, Ilara sighed. We surrender. The hall erupted in gasps. Daniel had won. The final decision. The simulation faded. The crowd murmured, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Daniel turned to the princesses. So, did I pass? Ilara studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. You did. Syrah grinned. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you. Sithra scoffed, but didn't argue. You made the right moves. You earned this victory. Velas simply nodded in approval. Ilara took a step forward, her golden eyes serious. You have completed all the trials. You are now officially recognized as the ruler of the Tarvani Empire. Daniel's stomach flipped. He had expected applause, maybe even cheers. Instead, the room fell silent. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. He had won the trials, but now came the hardest part, leading a real empire, not just a simulation. Ilara spoke again. But before you take the throne, there is one last matter. Daniel frowned. What is it? Ilara took a deep breath. The royal marriage. Daniel blinked. Wait. What? Syrah chuckled. Oh, did you forget? You didn't just inherit a kingdom. Sithra smirked. You also inherited us. Daniel's mind raced. He had survived monsters, diplomacy, and war simulations. But now he faced his greatest challenge yet. Daniel stood frozen. He had prepared himself for battles, mind games, and political struggles. But marriage, that was a challenge he had never expected. The four princesses stood before him, their expressions a mix of amusement and curiosity. The grand hall was silent, the gathered nobles and warriors waiting for his response. Ilara, always the serious one, spoke first. As the new ruler of the Tarvani Empire, tradition demands that you choose a queen. The late king's will was clear. You must select one of us. Daniel swallowed. And if I don't? Velas, calm as ever, answered. Then the empire may fall into chaos. Many will see you as an outsider, unworthy of the throne. Zyra smirked. Besides, human, would ruling alone really be that fun? Sithra folded her arms. Or are you afraid? Daniel sighed. He wasn't afraid. Well, maybe a little, but this was about more than just marriage. It was about stability, about proving he was fit to lead. He looked at each of them. They were all different, all strong in their own way. Ilara was the strategist, the most experienced in leadership. Sithra was the warrior, fierce and unyielding. Zyra was unpredictable, but always thinking 3 steps ahead. Velas was the calmest, wise beyond her years. Choosing one meant making an impossible decision. Is there no other way? He asked. Ilara's gaze softened. There is. Sithra raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ilara turned to the other princesses. Our fathers will said Daniel must marry one of us. But nowhere did it say he had to choose alone. Zyra grinned. Oh, now this is interesting. Velas nodded. If we cannot agree, the empire remains divided. But if we choose together. Sithra smirked. Then no one can argue with the decision. Daniel blinked. Wait, so you decide. Ilara gave him a small smile. You've proven yourself, Daniel. You fought, you led, and you survived. This time, let us fight for you. A test of hearts. To Daniel's surprise, the next day, the princesses held their own debate. Each of them made their case, arguing not just why they should be queen, but why the empire would benefit from their leadership. Ilara spoke of stability and wisdom. Daniel is a brilliant strategist, but he needs a partner who understands the responsibilities of rule. Sithra scoffed. A ruler needs more than just wisdom. He needs someone who can defend the throne. Thyra leaned back, smiling. And what about innovation? We stand at the edge of a new age. Daniel sees things differently. He needs someone who thinks beyond old traditions. Valus nodded, yet emotions cannot be ignored. If we are to unite, then the bond between ruler and queen must be strong. Daniel listened, stunned. This wasn't just about marriage. This was about trust, leadership, and the future of an empire. A decision made together. Hours passed. Finally, the four princesses reached their conclusion. They stood before Daniel, looking more united than ever before. Ilara spoke first. We have made our decision. Daniel tensed. And Sithra smirked. We chose Valus. Daniel blinked. Valus. Tyra grinned. She's the heart of the empire, the one who brings balance. Valus stepped forward, her expression calm as always. Do you accept? Daniel looked at her, then at the others. They were right. Valus had been the one who always understood him, the one who never tried to test him, but instead guided him. He smiled. I accept. The dawn of a new era. The news spread fast. The human outsider had not only passed the trials, but had also been accepted by the royal family themselves. The coronation was held the next day. Daniel stood beside Valus as the new king of the Tarvani Empire. Ilara became his chief strategist. Sithra became the general of the empire's forces. Syra took charge of technological advancements. And Valus, his queen, stood by his side, helping him guide the empire toward a new future. For the first time, the people cheered his name. And Daniel knew he was finally home.